Hey, welcome everybody. Hope you've been having a nice time at the conference. My name's Martin Hinshelwood. I'm a Visual Studio ALM MVP and Scrum coach with Scrum.org. I kind of live here in Scotland. For those that don't know, layer of Scotland, it's at the top of that little country called England, which is of no importance whatsoever. And I live near a city called Glasgow. But I think I've just signed my first ever customer in Scotland after 2 years of consulting in the UK. I work with customers kind of all over the place, whether that be TFS or Scrum, and I kind of work in 3 areas with customers. One of those is what I want to discuss today. The kind of first area is kind of the engineering and DevOps world, so application lifecycle management, TFS, continuous delivery, all of those kind of things. I have some of my customers here today. I also work in the agile and project development space, so working at the team level and helping organizations understand how to deliver software at the kind of 1 or 2 team scale. And recently, I guess in the last 5 years, it's become much more popular to do agile at the large scale. A lot more large organizations are doing that. So we started focusing on scaling agile and what that kind of means. I would take it that most of you guys coming here to this course would be in that kind of space. So you've probably all heard of the Standish group in Boston who create a little report called the Chaos Report. Anybody heard of the Chaos Report? I know you have, Rudy. Cool. So the Chaos Report, I can't just provide you with the report because it costs lots and lots and lots of money. I think it's about $7,000 to get a copy of the report from the Standish Group. You know how these things work. But there are some interesting things that come out of this report. They survey projects underway around the world, and they look at what the kind of success rates of those projects are from a bunch of different metric scenarios. So it is kind of survey based, so they're asking people, not necessarily going and looking, but it does provide us with some valuable data. For example, agile projects, so this is the 2015 report, agile projects are about 350% more likely to be successful than a traditional project, having an agile approach. Now you might think, well, that might make sense for small things, but maybe it doesn't make so much sense for big things. But in actual fact, the figures kind of show it's the other way around. That small projects are only 32% more likely to succeed if you do agile than traditional. Because let's face it, if you have one small team, one small group of people, it's not really that complicated. We can kind of talk to each other and get something done, even if we have no defined process. But large projects, large-scale projects, so that's more than 3 teams working together all the way up, is about 600% more likely to be successful. So in fact, waterfall is not working for organizations. Traditional project management is not working for organizations, but they have thought it does for a very long time. In fact, the Standish Group found that you're actually better not delivering all of the features that the customer asked for, and that your customers will be happier if you don't deliver all the features that they asked for. That seems a little bit weird, but that's what they're finding. That if you focus the features that you do deliver on the things that provide value for that customer today, rather than those things that they asked you for that they really want in 2 years' time, you have happier customers. So if you continuously do that, you end up with much happier customers. And it clearly shows that traditional project management is not working at the large scale. And in fact, the skill of your teams is one of the most important factors as well. Not just the process that you work in, but your team's ability to deliver. So the engineering practices, skills, domain knowledge of your teams. And good teams are over 200% more likely to be successful, even in a poor process, than unskilled teams. So you need to train your teams, train them well, and make sure you have that idea of engineering excellence. So I want to kind of cover Four main areas. I don't know how far we'll get through the practices, the last area, but I want to talk about whether it's worth the cost to scale, because there is a cost to scaling up within an organization. Whether it's agility or waterfall, there's a huge cost to that. Waterfall, you pay it at the end, so you don't really care that much. But in Agile, you're paying it all the time, so you can see that cost more effectively. And then I did use the term cookie cutter agility. I didn't know whether that would fly in Norway, but it just means having a blueprint that somebody else has done. So can you just say, well, here's an entire organizational structure and makeup that worked in company X. Can I just lift that up, take it to my organization, plop it down, and that will be awesome and that will work for us? Can that work? There's a lot of scaling frameworks out there. Most of them are very prescriptive. And what does that mean? And if it does or doesn't work, what might work? So can we just take the framework of Scrum, scale it up, and effectively use Scrum to scale Scrum? Can we just use that as our framework, and how might that work? What else might we have to do? So kind of look at that. And then a dive into some of the practices that we know are helping organizations to be effective at that level. So is it worth the cost? Okay, so first, what we expect to happen is as we add more people, as we add more teams, that we're able to deliver more. Yeah? That's kind of what we expect. Would you expect this kind of linear line to go up? So if we have 2 teams, we're going to deliver twice as much as 1 team? Well, everybody's shaking their head. Everybody's sold on this already. But you're not going to get that. There's integration work that has to happen when you have 2 teams. It's either continuously in Agile projects or it's at the end in waterfall projects, but it still has to be paid. And what you actually kind of end up with is more of a kind of line that goes like this. And quite often, I don't know if anybody's worked on projects that have had this happen. You add enough people that is just impossible to deliver because we spend too much time worrying about the complexity that's going on, and we just can't get there. So what can we do instead? Well, wouldn't it be great if we had awesome teams? Well, awesome teams help us do more. Well, at the moment, the most popular framework for teams is delivering using Scrum. It's the most popular framework. I'm not saying everybody's doing it awesome, because they're not. Some people are picking and choosing. Some people have no intent of doing Scrum awesome, but doing agility at all is kind of a no-brainer. And a lot of the things that are in Scrum about implementing those inspect and adapt loops where we have type feedback around what's happening on a daily basis, type feedback on our iteration, type feedback with our stakeholders, type feedback on our process, are the things that we know all agility has to have. And Scrum is just a framework to make sure you at least do that core stuff. Whatever else you want to do, whether you want to use story points or whether you want to use stories or use cases or whatever, Scrum doesn't get involved in that. I know some Scrum trainers do. However, Scrum itself does not get involved in that. Go figure out what works best for you. And we know that already. However, most teams seem to get caught up in something that I like to call mechanical Scrum. Mechanical Scrum, I call it mechanical Scrum. I think Ken's favorite phrase is flaccid Scrum. And Scrum.org's adopted one is amateur Scrum. We're not taking this thing seriously. We've got these words that we know we have to use to keep management happy. And we're just going to talk the talk. But in order to walk the walk, there's a couple of extra pillars that we need to support that. The first one is those engineering practices, those skilled teams that we need to be able to do that. And it's not just, well, if they're really good .NET coders, then that will be awesome. What if you're building something like Schlumberger had an advert going earlier with Petrel, which I'm pretty sure has geologists and geophysics and all kinds of crazy stuff that most coders have absolutely no idea about. So you need teams that have both engineering excellence and the domain knowledge to be able to deliver effectively, and that can be hard because it takes a long time to build domain knowledge, and especially if you need people with PhDs. I used to work with an organization in the UK that when I went to visit them, I was the only person in the building that did not have a PhD. All of the coders, the guy managing the TFS server and the infrastructure had a PhD. Everybody in the organization did, and they were building software that controlled the flow of liquids through oil rigs. So all physics PhDs, and everybody in the organization, so everybody understood the domain. All the coders, everybody. So we need that, but we also need to not just pay lip service to the mechanics of Scrum, the story that people tell, but embody the values and principles that come from the Agile Manifesto, that come from that idea that they were trying to achieve. And not just following the words, but the ideas that they were trying to achieve. And that's hard. But once we have that in one team, you could say that that team's professional now. They're doing this, and they're doing it well, and they're doing it effectively. That would be a professional Scrum team. That's something that Scrum.org has been focused on over the last 5 years it's been around, is trying to create those professional Scrum teams, because they realized really early on that the only way to scale software and scale building software is to use professional teams as a basis. For example, if you had 5 teams that all had a different idea of what quality level was expected by the business, and you've got to integrate that work at the end of the month, how much fun is that going to be? Because I can tell you it's not. You're going to have lots of integration work. And professional teams tend to work together a little bit better than amateur teams. So what about all these large frameworks that have been talked about? I'm not going to name any names, but there's a whole bunch of them. And there's lots of people touting them all over the world. And some of them have been effective. And in fact, in order for them to be seen as valuable, they have to have been effective somewhere. But just because they're effective somewhere doesn't mean that they're effective for you and for your organization. Because culture. Gary Short's doing a session later, in one of his big statements that he's a data scientist, and he always says, because maths. You know, why is this the way it is? Because maths. Well, in process space, it's because culture. Culture is always the reason why we can't do things, because what is culture? It's the way we do things here. That's your organizational culture. And bringing in, if you've got 100,000 people in your organization, bringing in a few people new is not going to change your culture, because they're going to get assimilated pretty quick. Yeah? I used to work for a company in the UK called Agreco, and we called it Agrecofied. They were assimilated into the organization, and they had all these ideals of all these awesome things they could do, and then it got beaten out of them fairly quickly. That just happens. There's only so much you can do. You need to focus on, you need focus to understand the direction you're going. And one of the things that I've seen used quite effectively is something called the Schneider model. The Schneider model itself is a graph, but there's a bunch of questions that help you place yourself in the graph. I'm not going to go through all the questions because that would just be silly, but I want to kind of describe the Schneider model and for you to think about where you might fit. So, for example, they have a linear axis, which is people on the left, people-orientated versus company-orientated. Okay? So agility tends to be more left, and waterfall tends to be totally over on the right. Okay? Just as a rough guide. I'm not saying you can't be agile on the right, but it's more difficult. So think about your organization and kind of where you might sit in that. Are you more on the people-orientated, or are you more on the corporate-orientated and the corporate identity? So it's very impersonal. And then we have another axis, which is possibilities and innovation at the bottom, and kind of reality-orientated at the top. That's not to say necessarily pragmatic, but taking that the only thing that matters is what I can see in front of me, rather than trying to innovate to get to where you might need to be that you don't really know yet. Microsoft has made that change. They were very actuality orientated for a very long time, and they found they were getting further and further behind on the curve. and everybody else was steaming ahead of them, and they need to figure out how do we get ahead of the curve. Our enterprise customers are not at the head of the curve, but we need to be there so that it's baked when they get that, those kind of things. So where would your organization sit? Are you more focused on innovation or more focused on actuality? And neither of them are necessarily bad things. But what you end up with is you have these quadrants. So if we were to give those quadrants names or identities, this is kind of, we succeed by keeping control. It's all about the control. So there's lots of words that kind of, you know, embody that control. We're going to have standards. We're going to have security, predictability, power, order. All of these things are not necessarily bad words. They can be good words, but they embody control. Okay? What about the bottom quadrant there? We succeed by being the best. That's the innovation. We're still company-orientated, innovation, and that might be where your organization sits. Craftsmanship, professionalism, achievement, it's competence. Yeah? Okay. What about the top left? We succeed by working together. So it's really about interaction, knowing what's going on, working with people, collaborating. So that's your kind of collaboration space. And just because you're in control doesn't mean you don't have any collaboration. It's a sliding scale. You're going to have, your organization is going to have some of everything, and different parts of your organization are going to have different, are going to sit somewhere different. But as your organization as a whole is pushing that culture down to the rest of your organization, what does that look like? So the last space, kind of down here, is the space doesn't. Americans don't like this space because it's kind of in the socialist space, because it's people and innovation, and they don't like that. But we succeed by growing people who fulfill our vision, which does kind of sound a little bit like the American way, or what they think it is. But we need people, and we have a vision, and we need those people to enact that vision. That's the point there. So creativity, evolution, faith, because we don't always know things are going to be successful, so there's a certain amount of taking on faith and growing and creativity. There's cultivation. We're cultivating people and ideas and things going on with an organization. So if you, where do your organization sit? If you just think about where on this map you might sit, that's your organizational cultural fingerprint. That's where you are right now. So you might be here in control. So that's not totally on the right. We're not controlling everything everybody does. We've got some collaboration. We're not right at the top, so we've got some competence. Yeah? So it's not all bad, because, you know, command and control we know doesn't work. But it's a unique place. Every organization that you go to will be somewhere else in the graph. They might be close to that spot, but they're somewhere else. It's the unique fingerprint of the organization. And if, let's say, you wanted to move over here to collaboration, because really moving all the way down to cultivation from control is that's like, don't even start thinking about that. Take a journey somewhere else first. But getting to collaboration, that's hard. Is it a straight line? Are we just going to go, well, we're in control and now we're over here in collaboration? No. It's going to take time to get there. It's going to take a lot of effort to get there, and substantial focus and direction in changing the organization. But it's not going to look like that. That's the land of unicorns and rainbows. You can't just go A to B. So what does it maybe look like? Well, you know, you're going to weave about, you're going to go off track, you're going to have to pull that back, you're going to make decisions that take you one way, and your path from A to B is going to be different. And where you get to is going to be different from where you thought you were, and it's going to be different from every other organization on the planet. So can we establish that you start from a unique place, you go to a unique place, and how you get there is unique? Does that sound fair? So how can you take a predefined big-ass process and just plop it down your organization and hope and it'll work? It's not even possible. Your journey is going to be different. Your practices are going to be different. So in my world, I live in the Scrum world. We've been using Scrum for a very long time to kind of do that at the micro level, at the team level. take a team that maybe sucks, maybe they don't, but maybe they suck, and we want to make them better. So we start with a framework around the team, get them doing certain things, and most of the time, teams start to realize the things they're doing wrong themselves. If not, they maybe need a little help, some facilitation and coaching, and they start to figure it out, and they realize how much better a place it is, so they stay there. That's enacting change, establish it, and then hopefully it sticks. So why can't we do that at the larger scale? Well, because it's hard, and there's lots more moving parts. It's much more complex. So is there a way to use Scrum to scale Scrum? But really, that's not a good thing to call it. So Scrum.org have been working on this for quite a while, a number of years. They've looked at a lot of organizations, and they needed to come up with a, kind of catchy name for what it's going to be called, because, you need one. There's safe, there's dad, there's all sorts of things out there. We need some way that people can search for it and identify it. So they decided that it's really about the people. It's really about the connections between people. It's really a nexus. You've got a relationship and connections between people and things. And that's the thing we want to model. We don't want to focus on the stuff that is unique to your organization. Focus on the thing that's the same for everybody. This is something that everybody needs. And how do we build a framework around that while keeping it casual? Because you don't want to be overburdened by process and have something that happens there. So we start with the Scrum Framework. I showed you this earlier. It's pretty simple. It's hard to do, granted, but it's a fairly simple process with not many things going on. Okay? You might disagree with that if you're using Kanban. You might go, well, there's tons of process. But it provides some cadence, it provides some guidance. It's a framework for the team. But we need to do some extra things because, that's hard at scale. So we want to introduce kind of the concept of team of teams. Team of Teams was introduced a long time ago in Scrum of Scrums, but it kind of didn't work in most organizations because they thought, well, if we scale up, we just use Scrum of Scrums and everything will be awesome. But that's just one practice that was designed to help it scaling, and you needed a bunch of other stuff. You need more connections. So Scrum.org, we're looking at what connections do we need? Do we have to have? We don't want to prescribe stuff, but we want to make sure those connections happen, or at least there's a place for them. Okay? So the traditional list of roles, events, and artifacts has been augmented a little bit to add a couple of extra things that only matter at scale. So this is more than 2 teams. 2 teams can usually figure it out. More than 2, it's a little bit more difficult. So we've got a new role, and it's a team of teams role. It's an integration team, a Nexus integration team. We need a group that is able to, they might be part-time, so if you've got 3 teams, there might be a volunteer from each team gets together and helps figure this stuff up, but they're responsible and accountable for making sure your stuff ships. Yeah? You've got lots of things going on, lots of things added to the product. Yes. And we've got that Nexus integration team. But we also have a little bit more complicated planning because we've got like 1 product owner and we've got maybe 9 teams. So how does that product owner go to 9 teams sprint planning meetings? Well, they kind of can't. It's just not physically possible unless you've got that spinny thing from Harry Potter, but they don't exist. So we kind of need an extra sprint planning session to help us figure out what the teams are going to go look at. And we're not talking a long time, 30 minutes, just figure it out. We've got an additional daily Scrum, which is kind of like the traditional Scrum of Scrums idea. Again, these are all team of teams. So it's representatives from all of the teams getting together. And then we've also got a sprint review, because we need to review our stuff, but we can't really split that out. We're reviewing one thing at the end of the day. We're making one product. Here is the product we've just made. It is all fully integrated together and everybody's bits are there. Let's review it. So you need one thing. So the old sprint review's gone. We just got this one new one. We also need some help at the retrospective because, we need to figure out what's going on there. And we've got a sprint backlog that is a lot bigger than it was before because it's got potentially the plan to the PBIs plus the plan to complete a whole bunch of work, and we've got dependencies that we have to figure out. Because while we'd like to remove dependencies, it's really not possible. We're going to have to figure that out at runtime. So we need some way to kind of look at that and have an understanding of what that is. So on the standard Scrum diagram, that kind of looks like this. I've kind of tried to highlight in red the things that are different. So let's have a look at some of those items. We have the same product backlog. We can't get away from that. We have one product backlog. We have one product owner, one priority from that product owner. We can't get away from that. That's our single direction, our vision, our goal. But it potentially has additional levels of granularity. Yeah, stuff that's further out. I don't know if you've heard Brian Harry talk about how Microsoft moved towards agility for the TFS team because they ship every 3 weeks now to production. And they moved from shipping every 2 years to shipping every 3 weeks in the space of about 2 years and doing it well. That was not easy. But they have this idea of one backlog, but they have this idea of, well, we've got stuff we're doing now, which we kind of understand quite well, and then stuff we're going to go do in the next 6 months are kind of bigger rocks, little pebbles we're going to deliver, and then stuff far out in the future are the big rocks. Within the next 18 months, we have an idea of what big rocks we want to tackle. We don't know how much of that rock we're going to tackle. We don't know whether we're actually going to be able to deliver anything, but that's our goals. So you get that progressively less granular backlog. And we've always had those ideas in Scrum. It just didn't matter as much when you're one team. But if you've got 9 teams consuming work, it matters a lot. And it maintains that vision, what are we going after at the top level. And you need to refine that down to get it ready for the teams to be able to deliver just like you did before. And we take that backlog and we take it into a sprint planning meeting. But that's more complicated. We've got 9 teams. I'm just using 9 teams as an example because that sounds hard. And we're going to have a Nexus meeting first. Nexus meeting is literally 30 minutes. We already know what's in the backlog because you should be doing your refinement and stuff anyway, because we're all doing that. And we need a 30-minute meeting to just go, well, what's going to be on, what do we think is going to be on what team's backlog for that iteration? Teams are not committing to anything at this point. We just need a list of stuff to go look at during our planning meeting. And then teams go off, do their sprint planning meeting, and forecast the work that they are actually going to be able to deliver within that sprint. And that's when they pull stuff. They might throw stuff back as well. Man, I don't know what the hell that is. Take it away. That's okay too. And we end up with a sprint backlog. We've got the things we expected to deliver in this iteration plus a plan. Your product owner needs that to go to their stakeholders and figure out what they're going to do next, or how are they going to ship at the end of this sprint, that kind of thing. And our daily sprint should update that sprint planning meeting just like you would normally do. We also need a little bit of help daily because, if I'm just looking at my team's focus, the lens of my team only, I don't know what this other team's doing, but I've got a dependency on the work they're doing, and I can't start this other thing till they've finished that thing. So how do we figure that out? Well, daily, take a representative of each team of teams, get together, figure that stuff out. Sorry, Scottish. Figure that out, and then those people go back to their teams and take that knowledge with them. If you need you find out something is totally messed up and you need to go fix something, have those meetings. Just like in Scrum, you have those meetings. But that's not the point of this. It's to figure out that you need to have those things go on. Dependencies. One of the most important and problematic things in scale. And then we're working daily. We're producing software. We might have a 3-week iteration, 3-week sprint. At the end of that 3-week sprint, we have 100% integrated work with no further work required to ship if we so choose. Ideally, I know it's hard to get there, but that's what you want to have. Because at that point, any undone work on one team is a lower quality bar that's going to impact your ability to integrate another team's work. That can be a problem. What if I'm dependent on your PBI that you're going to deliver this sprint, and we did awesome about figuring that out, but you only got it half done because something you didn't understand happened later, and now I've got a bunch of stuff that's dependent on your stuff, and can we be done? No, we can't be done because you're not done, so it's a big undone fest. And that undone work is something you've got to pay back, so it's going to go straight into the next sprint, and you give your product owner no choices. Not a good place to be. So we're going to show working software, fully integrated working software, actual software at the end of the sprint. and show it to anybody that cares, stakeholders. Yes, I know this could be a ridiculously enormous meeting. 9 teams, let's call it 80 people working together, building software. That could be scary. There's lots of good practices to help go figure that out, but surely you can let the teams go figure it out. Microsoft, the TFS team, create videos. Before the end of the sprint, they create a video of the things that they've just gone and built. Those are distributed before the sprint review, so everybody can go view the videos that they care about and prep their feedback. And then when they go into the review session, they're just providing their feedback. It's a big feedback session. Get people together who care about that topic and provide it. Yes?
How long are the sprints?
So I wouldn't have any... how long are the sprints? Are you saying? How long is a sprint?
Just preparing a video is... That's a...
So I understand they literally spend 30 minutes, an hour on it.
Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, yes I can. The question was, surely that's a lot of work to create a video. When does that happen? If it is something that you need as an output to your sprint, you're going to do it as part of your sprint. But literally those particular teams, at this point, I did get told by Adam reviewed my slides, Adam Cogan, who did the TFS presentation, and he said I should show one of the videos that they created. However, I did not manage to get permission from the team, NDA, all that kind of stuff. But they're like 5-8 minutes videos, and they create them really, really quickly. Just a walkthrough, like a tester would do, a walkthrough of what it is you've just done with an explanation. Some teams, they have music, voiceover, and everything going on, but other teams just, there's something to go watch. Here's what we went and built. As much as you need and no more is effectively, yeah? But
Do you know how long their sprints are?
yes, they are. They're 3 weeks. And they ship at the end of every 3 weeks, and they have not missed a single shipment in the last 60 sprints. Which is insane, because they've got 300 people working on one product. Which is pretty impressive. They're shipping to the cloud on that cadence, not to on-premise on that cadence. They ship once a quarter to on-premise. Another good practice there, I've seen organizations use the science fair model. They have a big hall in their organization, a big room that they have, or they hire a room in a hotel, whatever they happen to do, and each team has a stand like we do in the middle of the hall here, and stakeholders are invited to go and provide feedback where they care. So they get to choose where they go within the room and provide that feedback. That's good practice. No mandation whatsoever. You can do it however you think is going to be most effective for your organization. But we talked about this thing called an integration team. What are they kind of there for? Well, again, they're usually a team of teams on really large software. They're probably fairly dedicated. But they need to be there to make sure that we have the capability to deliver working software. This is one of the things. It's almost kind of like your DevOps team, a little bit like your DevOps team. They're going to be responsible for making sure that everybody in the organization, everybody building the software, has the tools and skills necessary to deliver working increments at the end of every sprint, and go help them if they need help. It's okay if you need help with that. This stuff's hard. We might be building something ridiculously complicated and we need that extra level of communication. That's just fine. But usually they're part-time. Usually they're part-time. On massive software they tend to be full-time, but mostly they're part-time, and it's a team of teams, so representatives from each of the team, so they can take that knowledge that they just learned building your release pipeline back to the teams, so the teams then understand how to deliver through that release pipeline and not break it, or help go fix it when it needs fixed. But they're kind of, their priority, those individuals' priority is the integration team work, because that stuff must work. If one team doesn't deliver because they lose their guy who is the integration team, but the whole product is not able to deliver if they don't do that work, which is more important? Well, the whole product's more important than that one team's output. That's just reality. And then we've got a retrospective, which we can't really do all together because there's all sorts of things we discuss in a retrospective that you wouldn't want anybody else to know. Because retrospectives tend to sometimes need to be a little bit private. Some stuff's okay, and we'll tell you about the stuff that we think you need to know, but we keep the dirty laundry inside the team. So we need to have a kind of team of teams get together at the beginning of the retrospective to collect all the problems with integrating the product together to feed into the teams. This is extra information you might want to talk about. This is how the whole product went, not just your team. So they then have their sprint retrospective. They take that information plus their experience during the sprint, mush that all out, figure it out, and then they're going to have some output. Some of that output is just for their team, stuff they're going to go do and change, do better. Other things the wider Nexus needs to deal with, so they need to feed back into another team of teams that gets together, collects all of that feedback, does a little bit of analysis, and makes it happen. Now, one of the interesting things here, and this goes for all of those groups where I have the little teams working together, is they might not all be able to do it at the same time. Anybody here have teams across multiple time zones? Yes. Crazy time zones. Microsoft has that problem themselves. They've got guys in Hyderabad and 2 time zones in the US, North Carolina and Seattle. So what can you do in this space? Well, you need the Nexus meeting at the start and the Nexus meeting at the end to kind of box that, but you're not going to get everybody done in the 4 hours in a 1-month sprint that you want to spend in a retrospective. Yeah? You're not going to get those 4 hours done all at the same time. Each team is not going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to a retrospective. I've done that. I worked on a Scrum team there where I was the only person in the UK. 4 people in Beijing, 4 people in Australia, 12-hour time difference. I had to suck it up. But that's inside a team. That's bad to have time zones within a team. But your teams can just go have their retrospective. So the time from the start of the first Nexus to the end of the second Nexus there might try and keep it within 48 hours, which gives you enough time for all the time zones to meet through that period in their own time and be effective. Because you're not effective at 3 o'clock in the morning anyway. At least I'm not. I don't know if you guys are, but I'm not. So those boundings, both for the sprint planning and the retrospective, are within those potential constraints that are just a reality of people being distributed around the world. You can't do anything about that. Does that make sense? So there might be a bit of a delay from you've already started your sprint by the time the Nexus meets again to give you the information of stuff we need to change. That's an issue of scale. So we end up with that diagram. We've got the planning and the retrospective are those try and keep them time boxed to 48, no more than 48 hours. I mean, I think you could potentially do it in 24, but no more than 48 because it gets stale after that. Does that make sense? There's a few people with confused looks on their faces. Are you okay there? Okay. But that's effectively Nexus. Now, this is for 3 to 9 teams working together. Just like Scrum teams are most effective between 3 to 9 people, having a larger body, 3 to 9, is kind of where the effective nature sits. So what do you do if you have 90 teams? Well, you might want to look at breaking up your application into areas that are a little bit more distinct, that you can then have a Nexus working against each area. Yeah? So I work with some large organizations in Norway, and they actually they would have very little need of Nexus because they have very few large numbers of teams working against one area of the product. Does that make sense? So you don't need to scale if you ship a single product, but it's split up into 50 distinct things, and you have one team working against each of those 50 things. That's not a scaling issue. Yeah, that's just an organizational issue. Let's figure out how to do this. You're not integrating that work and having the crossovers that you need to deal with. You might have some of that, but you can usually figure that out. It's when you've got, when you're building Office, or Office is good with areas, but if you're building Word, or you're building TFS, or you're building VSO, and you have one product where everybody works in the same thing, you need to kind of go figure that out. So the sweet spot is 3 to 9, and you need to have those professional Scrum teams that know what they're doing. But, That's awesome. That's a framework. Just like Scrum is a framework, Scrum doesn't say you should use stories. It doesn't say you should use story points. They might be a good idea, but it doesn't say you should use them. Nothing to say you can't estimate the work that you've got to do in hours. I'm sure almost every Scrum trainer you meet would say that's a bad idea, but there's nothing to say you can't do that. So what are the practices that kind of we need for this? Are there any core practices that we know are kind of effective? Well, the first thing, don't work on more than one team at a time. Yeah? If you work on more than one team, you're context switching. If you're working on 2 teams at once, you're probably going to lose about 20% of your time just to remembering which thing you're working on. It's just brains. We can't do multitasking, no matter how much some people tell us that multitasking is easy. It's really not possible. You work on one thing at a time, and it's the switching that is the cost. But if you're working on 5 projects at once, you can lose 80% of your time just context switching. Think about it this way. Have you heard the term that Scrum teams work 24 hours a day? Because you know they kind of do. Because if I'm working on a Scrum team and I'm dedicated to that Scrum team and I'm 100% focused on solving the problems of that Scrum team, when I'm in the shower in the morning, my back of my brain is thinking about those problems that I had yesterday and how do I figure out how to solve that today? Yeah? Whatever the software issue is or whatever the product issue is, I'm thinking about that when I'm playing with the kids, when I'm going to the cinema. Back of my brain, I'm not consciously thinking about it. Back of my brain's trying to solve those problems. If I'm working on 4 projects at once and my biggest problem is how do I figure out how to juggle those 4 projects, all the back of my brain is doing is figuring out how to juggle those 4 projects. So I'm only getting that percentage that I'm actually focused on that time. Does that make sense? So why do organizations still do matrix teams? It doesn't really make any sense. We all know it doesn't make sense, yet they continue to do it. It's just craziness. Lots of waste. Another good practice is you can't just magically have 9 professional Scrum teams because magic. Send some unicorns in and suddenly we've got these Scrum teams. You need to kind of build them up. You need to start small and build up. Can you imagine if I said to you, go and hire me 50 developers that are good and I need them tomorrow? It's not going to happen. Same with building teams with domain knowledge, with technology knowledge that you're using. It's hard, let alone the knowledge of working together. So start with one team, get them good, start delivering more, and then start branching out. That's effectively how you, on the graph I had earlier, how can we just, instead of trying to add 2 teams to make this line better, why can't we just make this team, oh I can't, I was hoping I could draw on that, well I kind of can, make the one team be able to deliver more. Well, if we make them a better team who are more effective at working together, understand the technologies better, with better engineering practices, they should be able to deliver more. Take one team and scale that one team up. Then bring in another team when you can't get that any further optimization of that one team. But at some point, you're probably going to have to split those teams to seed more teams and create more effective teams. Just like if you have a large organization and you bring in a few people, they get assimilated. You want to have the body of knowledge, the majority in the team, to be able to take that forward. Another good practice, you guys, I'm sure, are 100% on with this. Don't try and build components, vertical slices. Yeah. If you're trying to build components, if you had a team responsible for the middle layer and a team responsible for the service layer, you've got a huge amount of dependencies you have to worry about for every single thing you build. How do I take this story, which is from the business perspective, and split it into the UI? It just doesn't work. Product owners stress over that all the time, and the problem is not solvable in that way. You need to get teams that can go all the way through the application. Now, that's really hard for organizations like the one I mentioned with all the PhDs, where you need highly skilled people in different places within the organization. Now, some Some organizations I see, for example, Microsoft, who have a lot of UI experts and user experience experts. I'm not saying that's equivalent to geophysics, but you know, it's a highly skilled thing that takes years of training and knowledge to go figure out. They're not going to make all the teams suddenly understand user experience. So they took those people and moved them into the product owner world. So they have teams that work for them that are absorbing some of that knowledge. Because if anybody here has worked with a product owner for a long time, you start to figure out the problems of that domain pretty quickly, because they're always asking you for the same thing and helping you figure out how to do stuff, and you learn something. You can learn that over time. Take some of that knowledge, bring it into the product owner world, and then disseminate that to the teams. That's a good way to do that. Another thing, I think there was a talk yesterday on microservices. Was there a talk yesterday on microservices? Microservices are awesome. Remove some of those dependencies. Compartmentalize the things you're building. There's another way not to have to scale, because we're all building little things that happen to go together, and we have some bits that scale. Is it appropriate for one guy working on one piece of software? Probably not. One team working together to deliver software, they may or may not get value from it, depending on all sorts of architectural and technological reasons. However, if you're building at scale, you're probably going to be doing this type of thing anyway, which is breaking all of your bits down into distinct pieces that you can control how they interact with each other and have contracts. And then you're really in the microservices world. How might you organize your development teams? Like I said, we've already agreed component teams are bad. But there are lots of different ways you can do that. And I'm not saying that having layer teams isn't going to work. It will still work. I work with loads of large organizations that at the humongous scale build software, and they have teams at the layer level. They have ridiculous integration issues and lots of waste from the complexity of merging all that stuff together and making it all work, but they're shipping, making lots of money, so it works. Doesn't mean you can't do that. It's just not particularly a good practice, but you can. Geographical location. You might build teams if you've got people distributed all over the world. Make sure your teams are co-located. Platform teams. They're providing a service to everybody else. Azure provides a service to us, various services, and their team is a platform team. They're building the platform that everybody else is going to build off. Anybody use personas in their organization? Yep. Microsoft used them, and they have used them really effectively, but it's understand your user and the motivation of your user, and having your developers, the people building your product and testing your product, understand the motivation of the user using your product will help them build a better product. So a lot of people have doing user stories, and instead of as some sort of user, they say, as Alice the trip rider. Because you already understand some of the motivation of that user already just from that piece, and then you go into what it is they want and why they want it within that particular scope. It's very powerful for figuring that out. This is my favorite one, use TFS. If you're at scale, you're not going to be able to use stickies on a board. It's just not possible. You get distributed teams across the world, it's just not possible. You're going to have some sort of digital tooling. Do you want to spend 90% of your time figuring out how all that tooling work goes together at scale? No. Install TFS, you're pretty much done, and there's lots of documentation out there to figure out some of those things that Microsoft are using this themselves to build at scale, so they're solving a lot of those problems for you already. That's not Scrum.org talking, by the way, that's just me. Because I'm a TFS guy too. But you've got to be able to have a system that supports multiple levels of granularity. You've got to be able to have a system that you can enshrine the dependencies so you can get an understanding of what's going on in there. You've got to have a system where you can add additional fields and metadata and be able to search on the things you need to find that are important to you. That kind of sounds like something like TFS. I know there are other systems out there, but it's free. If you've got MSDN, it's free. Visual Studio Online, it's pre-installed. get data. The most lossy thing you guys can do is build something your customers don't want. Or build something that your customers said they wanted, but don't actually use. Let's add more features to this thing nobody uses. Do you think the Office team said, let's add more features to Mail Merge in 2016? No, they didn't, because nobody uses it anymore. Everybody goes to MailChimp or some online tool to do those kind of things. So get telemetry on your applications. Get an understanding of how users are interacting with your applications. The example I'm using is Application Insights for Microsoft, which is basically Google Analytics for your app. And you can knit all of that data together to figure out what's going on within your application, how people are using it, how often they're using features. Yeah? But remember, data is not the be-all and end-all, because you might say, nobody uses this feature, or it's only used once a month, so maybe we don't need it anymore. Except it's used by the financial department, so maybe we do, because the month end. Yeah? So you just need to be careful with your metrics anyway, but it's very powerful to have those metrics and measures. And again, that's bringing some of the DevOps ideas back into our process. Feature toggles. So, anybody here do branching? Stop it. Stop branching. I don't mean 100% stop branching, but I mean, as a rule, stop branching. If you've got 90 teams on 90 different branches and you have to create integrated work at the end of every single iteration, you are in such a horrible place, it is ridiculous. The cost of merging all of those different things, it's going to be a nightmare. Don't do it. Get everybody on the one branch and use feature toggles. Be able to turn the things that you're building on and off in the shipped product. So yes, ship code to production that does not work, however, have it turned off. Yeah? Visual Studio, moving to, if you can, move your software to the cloud. I know it's not possible for all software, and there's all sorts of caveats in there. I understand. However, the TFS team were told they couldn't move their software to the cloud as well. They kind of did that. But the ability to have it turned on and off for different types of users so you can give users access to features early, get feedback, usage data early is almost worth the effort of whatever you need to do to achieve that. Even if part of your application can go that way and you can ship it more quickly, awesome. But feature toggles are a very important way. How do you ship at the end of the sprint if one team didn't make it? Feature toggles, turn their stuff off. Yes?
Do you want to, how to manage the discipline of this feature toggling? Because you must be very disciplined about change sets and stuff that you check in.
So the question is, how do you manage the discipline within the team of having these feature toggles, and how does that relate to change sets and what I'm checking in? I don't care about change sets is one as well. You're hopefully continuously building, creating a version of your product. That's what you're shipping. You're just turning some features off. So it's maybe in an XML config file, you're turning features on and off. Yeah, so it's in the product, so you can just ship. So but the discipline part, professional Scrum teams. We already have that discipline at that point, hopefully. Yes?
More comments on the question. It's more complex than saying don't use branches. I guess what you're trying to say is don't use long-lived branches. You should do a lot of branches.
Yes.
You can choose whether to use a toggle or to not integrate that branch at the end of the...
So the question was, it's not a wholesale don't use branches, it's don't use long-lived branches. And I would kind of agree and kind of disagree. It depends on your particular circumstance. And if you think about that squiggly line I drew for where you are on your route towards agility, it depends where you are. If you're really far down that road, I would say don't use branches. The TFS team don't use branches for 80 teams working together. They have branches for different versions of their product.
They use feature branches in Git.
So, okay. And then that comes to the question of, should you use Git? Yes. And should you use branches in Git? Yes. Should you use local branches in Git? Yes. But make sure your work is integrated into what it is people are shipping on a daily basis. Yeah?
Some things, like in the backend,
I agree, and there are all sorts of... I don't have those slides in the deck because I cut them to fit in the time, but I have a whole section around how you can build up... I want to build a new piece of the back-end engine. How do I do that while people are continuing to use the old piece of the back-end engine using feature toggles? And it is perfectly possible. You just need to engineer your way around it, and there are ways to do that. However, yes, I want to do a massive refactor across the whole product. Maybe a branch is a good idea, but again, maybe it isn't. Why can't you just do it a little piece at a time? I know. I didn't say it was going to be easy. If this was easy, we could get a bunch of chimpanzees in a room and they could just build our software for us. But it's not. It's really, really hard, and these things take discipline. Hopefully, there we go. Take discipline to be able to achieve, hence professional Scrum teams. Another technique that is certainly, I see, coming to the forefront of a lot of enterprises is this idea of internal open source. Internal open source is, no, I'm not going to just put all my stuff on GitHub because, you know, this is our IP and we can't do that. But within the boundary wall of our organization, having an active ability to, we're going to make a component, let's say it's a logging framework, and we're going to make it available to everybody within our organization, and they're going to have a way to search for these things, find them, just like we do when we go to GitHub and search for the thing we want to find if we want to use somebody else's stuff, but internal. That way you don't breach the IP thing, but people within your organization get the value. So if the Windows team want to use something that the TFS team have built, why shouldn't that be okay? And should they be copying the code or just using the component that they ship internally? Use the component, ship internally. Provide those frameworks and those capabilities. Cool. Well, that was the last practice that I had for you guys today. I have lots more stuff around that. I do a one-day course called, a two-day course called Scaling Agile. And my organization obviously helps people work their way through some of these problems. And again, some of my customers in the room, so feel free to ask people if they worked with me and how much fun that is. Okay, guys? Thank you very much for your time.